Alright, so now that we blocked in the lighting, let's try to add these details to the surfacing of the volcano so that we'll be able to add more interest to it. Because right now we don't have any kind of specular or enough material quality to the surfacing. So we're missing out on a lot of opportunities for lighting. You know, it's actually funny because I see a lot of the texture here, but the texture is gone in the render. So I think something might be up with the render settings. Let me check. Shading. So this all looks good. Let me check that there's no filtering enabled. So let me turn this down. Let me actually open the hypershade. Let's check this out in the hypershade. Oh boy. So let's try with the filtering turned off. Alright, so actually this does look better, but it still feels very blurry. And that looks much better to me, so something is definitely happening. Now if the filtering is set to 0, what about the bump filter? Let's try that, set to 0. Wow, that made a huge difference. Alright. So why don't we go to this material and turn this into a bling. Let's see if it maintains. Okay, cool. Yeah, because now we're getting a lot of interesting detail out of it. Cool. Now this is looking pretty good. Now the specular is a little too broad. So what we can do is probably go into the texture and adjust it. Now because we're using a procedural, we're probably gonna have to have some kind of layered shader that would allow us to do it. Also, let's take a look at what the UVs look like. Because I assume this is NURBS. So my assumption is that this will be going from a 0 to 1 gradient. So let's see. Yeah, I'm probably gonna have to create a layer shader. So under Maya surface, layer shader. Alright, so I'm gonna assign layer shader to the volcano. Call this volcano layer shader. Kind of just call it kind of map. Right? So, and the first slot for the first material, I'll drag you, and then I'll middle mouse drag this. So now that we have that, we're gonna need to have the transparency. So we're gonna need to create a second material. Now if we look at the reference images for the volcano, it seems like we could have flat red material. So why don't we go ahead and create a second bling, and for the time being let's just make it red, and then we're gonna create an image for the transparency. And because we're using NURBS, my guess is that all that we need is probably to just work inside a vertical gradient. So if we imagine the transparency for this is gonna probably have to look something like that. So I'm gonna paint this black, and I'm gonna save this as volcano matte, and then I'm gonna save this as a JPEG, volcano matte. So now that we have this image, I can go into the transparency and set this to file and volcano matte the JPEG. Okay, and then I'm gonna take this layer shader and I'm gonna take that and drag it here, and then right, so I actually got the axis wrong, so this actually needs to be rotated. Let me change this to percentage so I can make sure that I do this at the center, and then I'm gonna rotate this from the center like that. Well, it didn't do it. Well, alright, so let's see if that does it. Okay, so let's refresh. Alright, so that is kind of doing it. Although we have to invert it, and we have to probably, well, it's not even fully white, isn't it? Okay, I probably just need to add a bunch of extra detail. Probably even move it a little lower. Okay, so let's turn this white, and now let's add a bunch of extra detail. Again, this is probably very graphical. It's not gonna look like anything, and probably we actually get a seam here. The easiest way to avoid a seam is to use a guide and snap it around the same spot. So let's try to export this and see what happens. So let's reload. Alright, so this kind of looks terrible, but for the time being, this might actually be okay for the sake of demonstration. Now we probably want to have some kind of bevel, so what I'll do is actually add a glow. So under other glow, we don't need to have any kind of hue actually, and we're gonna spread this out slightly. And then I might even want to, let's export this and see what happens. Okay, alright. Maybe the glow isn't, the settings aren't quite right. I think we need more opacity and a little less size. So it's just a little softer, so it doesn't quite look like a glow when you look at it. Yeah, cool. Alright, so now that we have this, let's render it and let's see what happens. Alright, so I think what's happening is that the specular of this shader needs to respect the alpha. which means that right now there's two specks being layered on top from both these blends. So on this layer, we need to use the same map to block the specular. So I'm gonna pick this and use it for specular color, which means that now the shiny portion of that blend will not affect the ground. Alright, cool. Now let's go to this blend and let's make it a little bit more eccentric. And let's do the same for that one, so that there's a tighter specular. And we might want to tone down the specular of the liquid here, of the lava liquid. We might actually want to use the same trick we used before for the Fresnel, because in general, every time you have something reflective, you want to make sure that it's changing with the angle. So again, we take the alpha from the normals. Let me see. So let me copy and paste it, which of course doesn't work. So let me duplicate without connections. Right. And then we take that and we use the facing ratio for the V coordinate, and then we use this image for color gain, and then we use this image for specular color. Okay, and let's bring this back like that, and then we might have to do the same for that, but let's see what this looks like now. Okay, so hopefully it should be less reflective in the center like that, which is nice because it makes it used to be a little hazy before, but now it's giving us a much tighter spec. I think we should actually tint it a little red. So on the color gain, even though we're using the texture, we can go and we can tint it. But hopefully it won't affect. Yeah, right now we're using only one for both. We might actually want to use a different image, because this one is also being used for the transparency. So let's duplicate it with connections to network, and this one will only go to the transparency, so that we can take this other one and tint it a little red, so that the specular here will be tinted red. Okay. I think we can actually make it a little bit more of a warmer, fuller red, and the same goes for the color. We can make it a little fuller, darker. Also, I think we can have more kind of creeping patterns coming down from it. I think it might be too saturated. So in here, we can actually come and have more of a pattern, just to add some visual interest to the image. Okay, so we can just fill it with white. Let's export it. Let's reload it. And let's render. Okay, that's kind of cool. It's getting a little stretchy, I think. Let's see if there's any such thing as filtering happening. Yeah, in Maya software, the filtering is particularly bad. This doesn't happen as bad with renderman. But yeah, in Maya software, the filtering can really mess up your images sometimes. Alright, so I think we came a long way from here to here. But we're still getting very flat shading. And this is probably a little too simple. So I think we can take this image, duplicate the connections to network, and we can set that to be bump. And I probably would change it something like 0.5. So now we should get some interesting bump onto the surface, okay? But it's actually nice, probably just too strong. And we probably want to layer something similar to what the volcano has. So we're actually gonna take these and again duplicate it. And then we're going to use this as color gain so that we get a little bit of an interesting pattern. But I'm gonna take the color out of it. Just because it might be a little distracting. And we're only dealing with bump, so bump doesn't care about color anyway. Okay, so let's see what happens when you do that. I think we forgot to do something. Let me see. So the bump is an image, and we're mapping color gain with that, and alpha is luminance, but we're not seeing any effect on the bump. So why is that? Let me change this to 0. Change this to 1. Let's see if that helps. Interesting. I was expecting we would see more bump in there. Maybe it is too subtle. Let's set the color gain to 1. And alpha gain set to 1. And let's disable alpha is luminance just to make sure. Okay, so let's enable that again. Yeah, I mean, if we look at this image, definitely it should be doing something. If it's not, bump value. Alright, so I actually figured out I just had to invert the order. So instead of using the image and feeding it into the procedural and feeding it into the image, I did the opposite. I'm feeding the pattern into the bump, and then I'm using the image as the color gain for the fractal. But fractal is giving us a very busy image, so I actually want to go to the 2D node here and make it so it's not as busy. So on the ratio, actually want to probably reduce it, frequency ratio. So that should probably, hopefully, make it a little bit less busy. I probably want a little bit more busy than that. But not too much. And it's probably a little more than that. Okay, yeah, it looks pretty good. I think it's a little strong, so we actually want to set it to 0.5. Alright. Actually, it's a little too strong still. Let's set this to 1.5. Okay. Yeah, that's okay. So now that we have that, let's go back to where we started from. Okay. This probably looks a little too dull, so let's do the same thing we did where we use the facing ratio. So let's do this from scratch, so I don't have to worry about copying and pasting. We take sampler info, and we take ramp, and we say facing ratio drives the v coordinate, and then the v coordinate controls specular color. Right? And then we change this from it's a little laggy because of the viewport 2.0. That white. Okay. So hopefully that should already give us a little bit of interest to the specular, so it shouldn't be as even. Alright, it's giving us this nice fall off. Okay, maybe a little too much, so let's do exponential up. Let's see if that's a little better. That's a little, maybe too much. Let's do smooth. That tends to do a good job. Okay, yeah, that's good. I still think it's a little flat, but I think that's probably because the diffuse of this needs to go a little higher. Let's see if I can go into the color, and under the color gain I can make it a little brighter and see what that does. Hopefully it makes it brighter towards the light. It's actually brightening a little bit too evenly. I think it's interesting because there's a lot of shaping here, but not as much there, which is kind of strange. We can probably fix it in post though, if it's something that has to do with the material. We may even want to take the specularity down, if the issue is that it's getting a little too reflective. I might actually want to use the same fractal image so that we can get a little bit more specular hits. Because right now we are using a ramp for that, but we might actually want to duplicate this and actually using that on the color again, so that the specular for that has a little bit of interesting pattern. And we might want to make this image a little brighter and add a little bit of contrast to it. So let's see what happens after we do that. Hopefully we should get more distinct specular hits on the volcano. We might have to, onto the material, go back and increase these a little bit so we can see it better. Okay. I think it's definitely adding a little bit of interest. It's probably a little too saturated. And I still think it's kind of weird. I think I might want to take the light and move it more frontal. Because even though it's not terribly from the side, it's definitely making it look like it is. So I definitely may need, actually, I don't think this is the right light. So let me go onto the volcano light. Let me move this so it's more frontal. And let me actually tighten it. Okay. So let's see what this looks like now. So I think it definitely helped with the read. I think the sphere is blowing out. I think the sphere definitely needs to come down. Like the material is just too up there. It's too bright. I think it's because the color map has such bright colors. In nature, you very rarely have colors that go all the way that saturated. So that's probably why it looks so crazy right now. So hopefully this should help bringing you back into the range of the color palette that we have. Yeah. I still think that that looks so strangely flat. Let me make it a little brighter. I think we might have gone too far darkening this guy though. I think this can go back up a little. Alright, so let's do this one last time. I think this wall is looking a little flat. Actually, it looks like the bump kind of disappeared from this guy. What happened? That... Interesting. Yeah, I feel like the specular isn't giving me what I wanted here. So I might actually remove this fractal as the color gain. That's interesting, we're still getting those strange specks there. Oh well. It's probably still better than what we started with. Let me see if I can bring back some of the saturation here. Cool. So I wish this had more shape because it's looking really flat. What we could actually do, which is kind of strange and unfortunate, is that we might actually take this light that we called volcano light and actually duplicate it and have two of them, one for the sphere and one for the volcano itself, because it feels like the volcano needs a really lateral side light to make it really pop. So actually gonna call this top sphere, I guess that's what it is. And we're gonna disable illuminate by default for both of them. And then we're gonna take the volcano key, pick the volcano, make light links. Top sphere key, pick that, make light links. And then for the volcano, we're actually gonna look through selected and move it more to the side so that we get more shape out of it. And then let's see what happens. Hopefully we're gonna get more shape out of the volcano. Yeah, I think it is helping. We're getting more defined shape. We might even want to move the light low to the ground. Maybe that will help too. Yeah, I think that's definitely helping to get more shape out of the volcano. I think we might have gone a little too far maybe. So let's bring it back a little bit. Okay. Alright, so I think we need a little bit more gradient on that. So this light onto the wall, we might actually want to make it a little brighter and see if that gives us a little bit more contrast into the image. Which it is, but I think we can increase it, make it a little bit more dramatic. Okay. Alright, so again, let's delete all those things so we can look at where we came from and where we arrived. So we can make sure we're going in the right direction. Okay. Cool. So now talking about lighting, I think at this point we blocked in the lighting, but we need to definitely improve the models, add more interest in the textures, fix some of the things that I talked about in this before we move on. So I think I'll go back and do another pass at the textures for the material before going into the finishing touches for lighting and then the compositing.